Thank you all again for joining us. My name is Colleen Doherty. For those of you who have not been able to attend one of these sessions yet, I use she, her pronouns, and I'm currently a program coordinator with the Center for Research and Fellowships here at Georgetown. And today we're going to be talking about formatting your fellowship resume. And a lot of this information, just like the rest of our workshops for the Laidlaw program, are going to be applicable to other fellowships as well. And so we're going to be talking about things both in relation to the Laidlaw program as well as a little bit more generally, because as first and second year students, you have the whole fellowship world in front of you, right? So there's lots of opportunities coming your way soon. As a reminder, or for those of you who are joining us for the first time, to kind of give you a little bit of a rundown of who we are. So the Center for Research and Fellowships is the office on campus that provides advising on competitive fellowship programs and research opportunities. And so we're thinking about fellowships specifically, we're thinking about opportunities that are funding or providing support for different academic and professional development opportunities. And so many of them will provide funding for study abroad programs, language study, research projects, creative projects. They may fund, they may provide funding for you while you're taking an internship of some kind, right? So like maybe you've got an unpaid internship lined up, but you need to pay rent and you need to buy groceries and you need to live a life. And so sometimes there may be fellowship opportunities with funding available for those opportunities. Academic programs. So there are some fellowships that will provide funding for additional tuition or essentially a scholarship, or to help fund other educational costs, as well as postgraduate study and research opportunities. So that's a little bit about what we do. So when we're thinking about resumes, right, many of you will have written a resume probably at least once in your life, whether it was, for a class assignment in high school, or when you were applying to college, you probably wrote a resume maybe for some of your applications, especially if you were applying to a more competitive major program or degree program, or if you're applying for scholarship opportunities, you may have had to write a resume at some point, right, so far. You may have even had a workshop in high school about like what is a resume and how to write one. And a lot of the resume tips and when we think about resumes, we're thinking about them from the perspective of applying for jobs, right? And that is like the majority of the time that you're going to write a resume is probably for a job application. And very similar, right? You still want a lot of the same tips apply. However, when we're thinking about fellowships, a resume is providing the framework for your application. When we're thinking about different types of fellowship applications, every single aspect of the application, you want it to be tailored to the fellowship itself. So whether it's the resume, your leadership essay, or any other essays that are required as part of the fellowship application, the application form itself, the entire application is a package that you are putting together to craft a narrative that you are sharing and telling to the review committee that is reviewing your application and thus selecting the individuals who are part of the fellowship. In this case, for the Laidlaw program, you're essentially creating a little package of your leadership abilities and like why you want to be part of this program for our interview and selection committee. The resume thus provides this framework for you to sort of build off of as you're kind of crafting your application, crafting all the rest of your application materials, as well as backing up that narrative. So it's a little bit of twofold, right? So it's for you, it's providing this framework and outline, to kind of craft that application. And on the reviewer end, it serves as like another example of like, yes, this person did all these things that they said that they're doing, right? And this is where they did it, and this is how they did it, and when they did it, and what they did during these experiences. Just like with a job application or a resume for a job, or other situations where you might be writing a resume, you want to tailor your resume to the specific situation. And so any experience that you discuss or include in your application, you want to make sure is included in your resume. So you're always making sure to keep the purpose of the application and thus your resume in mind when you're writing. So what is it, right? What even is a resume, right? Like, so let's kind of get back to basics a little bit. So a resume is a 1 to 2 page summary of your current and past experiences. Again, with a fellowship resume, you're using this to highlight the relevant experiences to the fellowship you're applying for. And you're also sort of corroborating that narrative that you're creating. A resume is different than a CV, right? Sometimes you may have like heard them interchangeably depending on who you're talking to and the field that you're in. But resumes are often shorter and more focused on your professional experiences, though they can speak to your to other experiences as well. Whereas this curriculum vitae or CV is typically longer, provides an overview of a candidate's entire professional career. So it is everything that you have ever done in your professional life, as it is, especially as it is geared towards this particular experience. They're much more academically inclined and much more focused on research, publications, presentations. And so as you kind of continue in your career, especially if you are in a career that is puts a high value on research, a CV, you're going to start sort of migrating towards a CV. For most fellowship applications, they're going to ask for a resume rather than a CV. Always, 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 and I want to reiterate this like a number of times throughout today's presentation, always make sure that you're adhering to the fellowship guidelines. If they're asking for a CV, give them a CV. If they're asking for a resume, give them a resume. So regardless of which one they're asking for, make sure that you're sticking to that particular format. And today we're going to talk mostly about resumes because CVs tend to be very, very rare at this point in the stage of professional life and academic life that you're in. Not unheard of, but a little rare. Also, when we're thinking about the resume, again, thinking about that impact, consider the fellowship. What is the mission of the sponsoring organization? What is the emphasis that the sponsoring organization or foundation puts on this particular fellowship? What is the goal of the fellowship? What are you getting out of it? For the Laidlaw program, right, as we've already discussed, it is the foundation puts a very heavy emphasis on the combination and sort of overlap of academics, research, and leadership. And the intersections of research and leadership and how formal education can inform ethical leaders. And so those are the things that you kind of want to keep in mind as you're writing your resume for the Laidlaw application. Highlighting your leadership skills, highlighting those experiences where you have been a leader in every facet, whether it's on a team of an organization. And as we've discussed before, leaders, you can show those leadership skills even just working as a member of a team rather than necessarily like a manager or a president of an organization. There's ways to show your leadership skills at sort of every level. And so when you're writing your resume, and especially writing the descriptions of each experience, highlighting those things that you brought to the table for the team or group that you're working with. So again, And again, making sure that you're using your resume to sort of back up the information that you're also sharing in your application. And then finally, goals. So what do you hope to convey through your application overall? You know, consider the most relevant experiences, include those like most salient details in your resume. If you are sharing, you know, your experiences as the captain of a sports team, you know, you want to make sure that you're sharing those things that are the most important from that experience. Or if you were a research assistant in a lab and you like led a group of people in your lab, you know, what were the things that were most salient to what you're sharing in your application. So a quick overview, and a shout out to the Colley Center for their wonderful examples of resumes, which this is pulled from. So a little bit of an overview. First, you have your header, right? And this is where your basic information is included, right? You've got your name, your contact information. Your name should be the most prominent part of your header, right? Any person that is reading a resume, whether it's, again, for fellowships or jobs, especially if they printed it out, but even if it's on the screen, they need to know immediately whose are they reading? Whose is this? Who does this belong to? And then, of course, you have your contact information. So you can include your mailing address, especially for fellowships. This actually is often important if it is based at all on your location. So for example, the Truman Scholarship is for the Truman Scholarship, it is 2 Truman Scholars are selected or 1 to 2 Truman Scholars are selected from each state. And it is based on your permanent residence. And so like that is an example of some place or of a fellowship where you will want to have your permanent residence. So where you call home versus maybe your campus address on your resume. In other instances where your location doesn't matter as much, you can include it. You don't necessarily have to include it. Most of the time, the mailing address, when it comes to jobs especially, dates back to like when you would be mailing in applications and they need to, you know, where are they mailing it back to. A little less relevant in, you know, society of email, but still important, again, for certain fellowship applications, so sometimes it's pretty good to include. You do want to always include an email and phone number so that they have some way of contacting you, especially when it comes down to finalist selection. Many times they may call you rather than email you to let you know that you're a finalist. Oftentimes people will also include personal pronouns in their header, especially if you're trying to help normalize the sharing of pronouns. It's a good place to include them. Or if you want to make sure that folks get your pronouns correct, maybe a gender neutral name, maybe you have pronouns where you use pronouns that are different from what others might assume them to be, you can include them in your header as well. For most resumes, again, education is usually at the top, especially, again, something for fellowship applications. We usually will suggest education to be at the top. So that way, again, they see who is this person, where are they coming from, is the educational experience relevant to this fellowship. For fellowships where you have to be from a certain major or are only open to people of certain majors, this is important. So you want to include that there. Of course, you want to include the name of your university. For places like Georgetown, where the school or college is relevant, you can include that. You obviously always include your major, your minor, your GPA, and your expected graduation month and year. You can also include your major GPA if that is relevant, in addition to your cumulative GPA. So you can kind of see that here. This example has cumulative GPA and then the major GPA, as well as a notation that this person was on the dean's list for 2 semesters. When formatting for a fellowship, we actually will, this is where our recommendations differ. We'll actually suggest not to include relevant coursework on your resume because most applications will request a transcript. And so you're just being redundant, and that is space that you can use for other things. So you don't actually have to include coursework on a resume unless it is requested. For each of your sections, education, experience, extracurriculars, you always want to go in reverse chronological order. So your most recent experience is first, and then kind of going in reverse from there. So for your education, you'd have your college experience first, and then high school if that's relevant, or if you're a transfer student, your current university, previous university, if that is relevant, you want to share that, and then high school if you're going to include that. Again, you don't have to. If it is relevant to your fellowship, include that. So then we move on to experience. Again, always selecting experiences that are relevant to the application itself. So each entry should have a header that tells what it was, where you were doing this experience, so like the name of the organization, the actual location, especially if that location is going to differ, right? So say maybe you did an internship or a volunteer experience with an organization that's based here in the States, but you did your actual experience was abroad. Noting where you did the experience, not where the office is located. So a great example is if you're a congressional intern, but you're interning at the district office rather than here in DC, note that it was the district office. That's another example. Each entry should have at least 3 to 4 bullet points, for about 3 to 4 bullet points describing that work. The bullets should have action verbs at the front, always being action oriented, describing and descriptive of like what it is that you actually did. You can include, and this is relevant for Laidlaw, research experiences can either be included in the main experience section, or you can have a research section that is focused just on your research experiences. So if you've worked in multiple labs before, the research section can be its own section. Another way to sort of break up experience is that if you have experiences related to the fellowship and then additional experiences that are somewhat related but not as directly related, you can kind of break those up instead. So again, if you have, if you're applying for Fulbright, even though we don't ask for a resume for Fulbright, but just go with me. If you're applying for Fulbright, you can share study abroad experiences that you've had. So study abroad experience and then other relevant experiences as an example. And then you can have a section for extracurricular activities. So if you are a member of a team of some sort, if you are taking part, especially in a cohort-based fellowship program, you can include that here. If you have volunteer experiences that you are taking part in, but they're only somewhat relevant, I would include those under activities rather than under experience. And skills. So any technical and language skills, especially if you're applying for a fellowship that has a language requirement, you want to note your language skills on your resume. And your level of language skills, right? So if you speak multiple languages, noting them in order of from the most that you know. So say like you speak 3 languages. One is your native language, you want to list that one first, and then advanced all the way down to like fluent, advanced, basic, sort of all the way down, and your skills in each of those languages. So maybe you have very good spoken Spanish, but cannot write Spanish to save your life, you want to make sure that you note that on your application, again, if it is relevant to the fellowship you're applying for. Your activities and skills section, again, just like every other section, should be relevant to the fellowship that you're applying for and complement the skills and experiences that you're sharing elsewhere on your resume and in your application. So if you have, experience with Word or social media skills in a professional setting, you want to share that on your resume as well. So yeah, questions so far? Okay, we'll move on. So some tips on resume writing. So always make sure to stick to your guidelines for font size, page length, and your margins. Do not be disqualified on a technicality. If you have 0.5 inch like half-inch margins and the fellowship requires 1-inch margins, make sure that your margins are 1 inch. If they specify that the font size should be 12-point font and you've used 10-point font, that's noticeable, right? These are things that are going to be that are noticeable, and you don't want to be disqualified on a technicality. Always using fonts that are easy to read. So safe ones are like Arial, Times New Roman, Garamond, Georgia, Open Sans, like the ones that are pretty basic and easy to read, stick with those. And page length, again, of course, like if you are applying for a fellowship that says 1 to 2 pages, 2 pages is fine. If it's 1 page, stick to 1 page. And always use all of your space. So if you're going to extend to 2 pages, make sure you're using all of those 2 pages. Don't go like 1.5 pages, because then there's like all of this wasted space that you could have used to describe more about the experiences that you've done. Being consistent and concise. So using brief statements for each bullet point to make use of the space. You really don't want to go more than 2 lines for a bullet point, because then you're not being concise. You're not, you want to keep it tight. And being consistent with your punctuation and formatting for each entry. So if you're using bullet points in your first entry for your section, use it in all of the other entries in all of the other sections. If you're using a period at the end of every sentence, use a period at the end of every single sentence. Action-oriented. So I mentioned this before, but making sure to start each bullet point with an action verb that is very descriptive of the work that you did, your responsibilities, your accomplishments. For current positions, you always want to use present tense, and for anything that has happened in the past, using past tense. So your current experiences, present, past experiences, past. Even if it is the most recent experience, if that experience has ended, needs to be past tense. And then staying on point. So including all of the relevant experiences to the fellowship, and tailoring your resume to that particular fellowship. If you are applying for a fellowship where you have to do like a self-led project, much like the Laidlaw, make sure to highlight those experiences in the past where you have been the leader on a project, or put together a project of your own and accomplished and took point on that project. Things to avoid: I statements. Do not use first person pronouns or I statements on your resume. Focus on very brief descriptive sentences beginning with action verbs. The one exception of that is if you use an objective, which we're seeing less and less on resumes, but they do exist on some. That is the one place on a resume where you can use an I statement and first person pronouns, because you want that objective section to be like a full paragraph or full sentences. Avoiding jargon and acronyms related to either your university or your field. So if you were writing your resume, you don't want to abbreviate your school or your major, right? If maybe you're a STEM major, you want to write out the full title of the major and not just put STEA on there. Or, maybe you're a member of a student organization, write out the full name of the student organization. Don't rely on acronyms. And any jargon for that is specific to your field, you want to avoid as much as possible. Even if it is a application that is specific to maybe like the sciences, the folks that are not, or I should say the folks that are reading your resume and your application are not necessarily going to be experts in your particular topic area. And so avoiding jargon everywhere that you can. Do not include personal data. Don't include your birthday, don't include, not that it really matters for fellowships, at least for right now, but don't include your marital status, don't include a photograph. Unless you're applying for something where they are requiring a photograph, don't include it. Doesn't matter, they don't need it. They'll see your picture when you see them in person. They'll see you when you meet them. They'll see you on Zoom. For fellowships especially, this is not something that is illegal, but it can, any of that information can help or can subconsciously bias, just like with a job can bias people and bias selection committee. So you want to avoid that bias as much as possible. When applying for fellowships outside of the United States, there are some countries where sharing that or asking for it is illegal. There's certain information that's illegal to ask for in the United States as well. If you're not sure what to include or if you should include it, just check with an advisor, whether it's a mentor that you have, an advisor at the center, or someone else that you know and trust. This last point is the most important point. Do not lie or exaggerate on your resume about your experiences or in your application. This honestly should go without saying, but it's important to always say it. There is a major difference between highlighting those salient points and highlighting your accomplishments and misrepresenting your contributions. On fellowships, competitive fellowships especially, it can feel very overwhelming when you know that these are very competitive, but these are things that are very easy to check up on. And it goes completely against anything, ethics of all kinds, right? To lie on an application of any kind. If you're not sure whether or not you are characterizing yourself appropriately, check with the folks that you worked with, right? So, if you aren't sure, if you are characterizing yourself appropriately, reach out to the advisor, say like, is this a good description of my work, do you think? Especially if it is a experience where you have a recommender who is submitting a letter of recommendation for you, you want to make sure that your points match up. So if you say that you led a team of 20 people on this lab research that is far and away above your experiences, and your recommender says that you led a group of 5 people on something that's a much smaller aspect of the research, that's going to be an immediate red flag. And you can, again, especially if this is someone that's recommending you for this program, work with, you can work with them, you can chat with them about what they're sharing and what you're sharing on your application, and you should be. If you joined us at our last 2 sessions ago to talk about recommenders and mentors. Yeah. Oh, before we move on, any questions so far? Okay. Yeah, when it comes to what you're sharing, honesty and authenticity is the most important piece, right? That will speak for itself. So now we're moving on to the examples. So I've got a couple of examples of resumes here. So this is the first one, and we can we'll go over it together. For this particular resume, this person is applying for the Goldwater, which is a science-based fellowship. Take a minute, read over this application. Actually, that's too easy of an example. We'll move rather than Goldwater. This person is applying for the Truman Scholarship, which, to kind of give you a rundown of what the Truman is. The Truman is a scholarship that is a living monument to Harry Truman, and is specifically for folks that are interested in public service and leadership and going into public service careers. So primarily like working in government, whether that's state, local, state, or federal, and are typically like leaders in their community. So take a moment, read over this resume, and then if you're watching the recording, take a moment, pause, read over the resume, and see, do you think that this is a good resume for someone who is applying for a fellowship that is public service oriented? And then I want to hear your thoughts for those of you who are on the call. And again, a shout out to the Colley Center, because I took one of their examples and adjusted it a little bit. And for those of you who are on the call with us, if you have thoughts, you want to share, what you think, you can either raise your hand or just unmute yourself and share. Patty.
I mean, I think it seems pretty good for highlighting like public service experience. He has his experience working for a government agency. He has volunteer experience under skills and activities, which maybe he would have wanted to highlight more prominently. But there's also like good leadership experience, and he discusses kind of his experience working for like different volunteer organizations and like volunteer-based projects, which all seems relevant.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good thoughts. Anybody else have thoughts before I jump in? Anything that this person could have done differently or done more of or less of? And there's no wrong answers. Yes, Jenna.
I think it's really good, but maybe in terms of the international relations experience, highlighting some of the results the specific results that came from the work at the agency or the IRC, like more numerical results and quantitative.
So there's a plane flying overhead. So you said giving a little bit more detail about like the results that they've gotten from past experiences. And did I miss anything else?
No, like I guess just more quantitative. Yeah.
Right, definitely. Yeah. So both of you are definitely on the right track. So, and like, yes, right. So as Patty mentioned, Jack has highlighted experiences like working in government and government related agencies, highlighted some experiences, right? Like highlighted past travel experiences, highlighted other, like highlighted their work in, you know, different areas that can be relevant, highlighted the relevant coursework they could have excluded, which is fine. The definitely could have expanded a little bit more on outcomes from work that they've done. Anytime you can provide some qualitative examples, you do want to include that. And they did include it here, right? Like under 15 committee members to design programs focused on human rights in Asia. Because this resume is a little bit more geared towards international relations, they might want to highlight some more of their domestic experiences as well. But definitely highlighting like any kind of experience with any kind of government agencies definitely looks pretty good. This resume probably is a little bit more geared towards a fellowship externally outside of the US, maybe like something, especially maybe something in Asia or Latin America, or something that was like that's focused on public policy, which the point of today was not to quiz you all on fellowship opportunities, was more like thinking about, you know, how can we tailor this resume? I think I would have changed the spacing a little bit, and so that we can kind of tighten up the spacing just a little bit and expand on their description. So that way that we can kind of think of, you know, what are some ways that we're highlighting more of the experience, sharing more of that, using the space a little bit better, so that we're like using as much white space as we can without like being too crowded. So yeah, overall not bad, pretty good resume. The font's pretty good. Probably would have changed the spacing in here a little bit. It feels like a little wide, but again, all of these are more formatting things rather than content. Oh. Okay. So here is another example. Anya, in this scenario, is applying for a research-based fellowship. Maybe she's applying for Laidlaw. Actually, we'll use Laidlaw as the example for this one. No, what are, again, take a moment, look at the resume, think about and like share, you know, what are things that Anya did well for this resume, what are things that she could have done differently. Yeah, take a look. Any thoughts? Patty.
I would say that it seems like there's a lot of white space. Like there's definitely a lot of space that she's not using. And if that's because she doesn't have more experience than what she put on here, there's a lot of things that she could expand on.
Mm-hmm.
Like even her 2 research positions, like the second one only has 2 bullet points, and some of them could definitely be explained in more detail. And then also like down in her extracurriculars under her education experience, like she could definitely kind of create descriptions about that as well. And then down in skills and abilities, like research and data collection. If you're applying for a research position, like you might want to be more specific, and she could definitely expand on that to fill the space.
Definitely. Yeah. And so this is, full disclosure, this is one that I just like pulled off of Canva and like just changed. Like it's purely like you can look up resume templates and this is on Canva and I just, you know, added a couple of the details. But yeah, and I mean like, and those templates are fine. Like regular template like this is fine depending on the type of application that you're applying for or the type of opportunity you're applying for. The definitely want to expand as much as you can on past experiences, right? And so they've, in this situation, you know, really highlighting the research experience, highlighting some of the research experiences, but definitely want to provide more description, right? So what did she do to prepare research publications? How many did she work on? You know, what types of interviews was she putting together, right? So like, yes, we have some background in terms of like, yes, she's an anthropology major, but were these, how long were these interviews? Were they multiple interviews? Was it just like one-offs? What kind of research was she doing? Is it primarily qualitative? Is it quantitative? How many research, how many research projects has she worked on? You know, these are all things that you want to really highlight. Definitely not highlighting any of the leadership abilities, right? We have it noted here below. Some teams that she's on and clubs that she's part of, but you know, we want to highlight, okay, what were the things that you do as part of this club? What are some of those leadership skills and abilities? Definitely want to expand on the data assessment and other skills. Something that I didn't note before that I should have noted and I'm going to note now is that like avoid any kind of like adjectives for on your resume, right? So like rather than say great communication skills, explain like what are those communication skills that you have and how are they relevant? In here, you don't want to say like, impressively organized, like she doesn't say this, right? But like, you don't want to say like impressively organized and conducted interviews. Let your experiences and your recommendations especially speak for themselves. And you don't have to like put sort of some of those adjectives trying to boost your experiences. Let the work that you did speak for itself. But yeah, definitely expanding a lot more, providing more description, providing more details, highlighting the awards and achievements a little bit more, right? Like, especially if you published, if you're published as a undergrad, where were you publishing? You know, was it a peer-reviewed journal? Because if it is, like, you want to make sure that, or if it is a well-known publication, you want to highlight that. And if you're not noting that, it seems like a little weird. Like, are you trying to hide? Like, was this self-published? Was this something that, like, yes, technically you're published, but it's not as impressive as like you were published in a peer-reviewed journal, or something that's a little bit more impressive that you want to highlight. And if it is something more impressive, you want to show that off. You want, like, that is an opportunity where, like, definitely highlight that work. Any fellowship opportunities that she's been part of, like, you want to highlight those as well. So, which brings us to our next example. So this is the example that it was on the previous, or on the first page, where we kind of reviewed the different sections. But let's say that this person's actually a first-year student and not expected to have already graduated. If this is a first-year student and the dates are all correct for a first-year student or second-year student, this person's also applying for Laidlaw. You know, what are thoughts? What are things that this person did well? What could they have highlighted differently or done differently? And how can they kind of show good experiences? Jenna.
Yeah, so in terms of crafting a narrative, it looks like from the experiences that she has on her resume, it's very much focused on kind of public service, law, research. And so to, I think, highlight that more in experience, I would move the stuff under extracurricular activities into experience, and then the work that she did with the Hoya and the tombs into extracurricular activities, just to have a little bit more consistency. But otherwise, I think it's really good.
Mhm. Any other thoughts? Yeah, I mean, I would agree. Yeah, for like for Laidlaw, right? Like if you're applying for a Laidlaw fellowship, or for the Laidlaw Scholars Program, I would definitely like move the wait staff under. I would probably like change extracurriculars to maybe like other experience or relevant experience, right? And then move that down there. Maybe keep and then move the Carroll Fellowship and the Jumpstart Program membership up into experience. Maybe if we don't know this, right, but maybe if she has some research experience that she has taken part in, highlighting some of that maybe, or highlighting any other experiences where, you know, she has worked in a more academic setting. Maybe she was a TA, if she's been a TA or something, for a faculty member, or a faculty assistant of any kind, you know, highlighting that work as well. But yeah, I mean, overall, highlighting good experiences, leadership experiences, and been very explicit about the work that she did, you know, providing good details on, you know, especially like under the legal intern, you know, the legal research and clerical duties, you know, what were those, you know, she explained like that was in a small office, how many cases she worked on, you know, noted how many, probably maybe could have noted like how many writers and assistants she trained, but overall good resume. So that brings us to a review of our timeline. Again, just reminders for folks that the application for the Laidlaw program is due February 25th at 9 a.m. That's to the fellowship's office at fellowships@georgetown.edu. Initial notifications will go out in March. So whether or not you are moving on to the semifinalist round, semifinalist interviews will happen in March, with selection happening towards the end of March, early April, and then a program kickoff and celebration happening in April. And then we'll kick off the program as a whole with an orientation retreat and your research summer beginning in June. So for those of you who joined us today, we'll have some time for questions. If you're watching the recording, thank you for watching. I hope that this was helpful. And join us for our next research proposal this Friday, where our director, Lauren Tuckley, will be covering more of the research proposal workshop module. And we appreciate you if you're watching the recording.